I have a question about your coverage of Ricardo Hausmann, of José Ignacio Hernández, and what it reveals about the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. I'm thinking particularly about Articles of Agreement, Article 7, Section 10, political activity prohibited.
Is this in reference to the World Bank Arbitration Court?
Exactly.
So the reason José Ignacio Hernández ultimately had to resign from the Guaidó shadow administration is because in June, the Venezuelan government released an audio recording of his testimony before the opposition-controlled National Assembly Energy Commission in Venezuela. And during that testimony, Mr. Hernandez discussed the ways that he coordinated with the World Bank's president, David Malpass, and the World Bank Arbitration Court regarding cases dealing with Venezuela at that court. The World Bank Arbitration Court is where any corporation which wants to sue an individual country can come and make their case. And so right now there are around 16 cases pending against Venezuela at this court, brought by corporations such as Koch Industry, Air Canada, ConocoPhillips. And so these were the cases that José Ignacio Hernández was essentially bragging to Venezuelan lawmakers that he coordinated a policy regarding these cases with the World Bank and with its president and with the court itself. And this calls into question the independence of the World Bank Arbitration Court. It's not supposed to be the way any legal institution would not supposed to be, coordinating directly with political characters. And the bank itself, the World Bank in itself and its president, its officials, such as David Malpass, are barred from engaging in political activity with the rule you just mentioned. So when José Ignacio Hernández made this comment to the National Assembly, it really not only exposed him, but it placed the World Bank in a very bad light, and he had to resign. It's interesting because that had to mean that members of Venezuela's opposition actually leaked that audio to the Venezuelan government, because there are no government parties participating in those hearings. So unless the government somehow tapped into the meeting, it had to have been people from within Venezuela's opposition, people close to José Ignacio Hernández and Popular Will, which released that audio. And it's interesting also because we're supposed to believe, based on the way Hernández was speaking, that when he said he was coordinating with the bank and with the arbitration court, that he was working on behalf of the Venezuelan people, the Venezuelan government. But we know, based on his record, that he has way more history working on behalf of the corporations suing Venezuela than actually working on behalf of the Venezuelan government or people. So if he's coordinating a strategy with the bank and its president, then I would personally believe that he's working in the interest of the corporations trying to sue Venezuela and take money and steal assets from Venezuela, and not actually trying to protect the interests of his homeland. But there was another part of the recording that was also very important and got overlooked, and that was during questioning from a member of Venezuela's opposition from the Primero Justicia party, a man named Jorge Millán, and he brought up a case in which José Ignacio Hernández was apparently closely involved, and questioned his relationship with Trafigura, which is a large international oil company. And the reason that's important, or really key to understand his role and his relationship with Trafigura, is because I recently published another investigation at the Grayzone breaking down what really is the largest scheme, the largest scandal and theft ever carried out against the Venezuelan government and against the Venezuelan people. And it was through a bribery and corruption plot, which began in 2004 and came to light in 2018 when a litigation trust established by members of Venezuela's government, again, this is prior to the recognition of Juan Guaidó, so we're talking about the Maduro government, the internationally recognized government of Venezuela, set up a litigation trust to work on behalf of Petróleos de Venezuela, the Venezuelan state-owned oil company, in order to sue several international oil giants, as well as a consulting firm and banks, which were involved in carrying out a multi-billion-dollar bribery scheme against PDVSA, against the state-owned oil company. And what essentially happened is in 2004, two former oil traders who'd worked for Petróleos de Venezuela, a man named Francisco Murillo and another man named Vaquero. I'm drawing a blank on his first name right now. But the two of them set up a private consulting firm called Helsing Incorporated. And what this lawsuit filed in 2018 reveals is that starting in 2004, these two individuals leveraged their contacts within PDVSA, within the state-owned oil company working in Caracas, mainly in the supply and management department, in order to rig contracts on behalf of international oil companies, which paid the consulting firm large sums of money. In one of the bank ledgers submitted to the court, there was a payment of over $400,000 made to the father-in-law of a corrupt PDVSA official within the course of just a few months, 4 months, something like that. So we're talking about, if this was going on from 2004 to until 2018 at least, these oil companies were pouring a ton of money, millions of dollars, into bribing these PDVSA officials. What they would do is they would send the money to Helsing, this consulting firm, which would then pass the money to bribed PDVSA officials. Those were the bribes. And those PDVSA officials would then rig contracts within the PDVSA system in order to favor the companies that were paying the bribes. And the contracts, it was not only, they were not only rigging contracts when PDVSA was trying to sell its oil on the market, so that PDVSA was selling its oil at an artificially depressed price because only these few oil companies were going to be eligible for the contracts based on the changes the PDVSA officials would make. But they also rigged contracts when PDVSA was trying to buy chemicals and supplies that it needed in order to refine its own oil. So PDVSA, for 15 years at least, was selling its oil at a depressed market price and paying for supplies at an inflated market price. And the lawsuit estimates that this caused billions of dollars in damage to PDVSA and essentially cheated the company out of, some estimates are over $15 billion. I mean, that would make this one of the most expensive, highest valued court cases currently sitting in the United States. And remarkably, just a few months after the U.S. recognized Juan Guaidó, a U.S. court threw out this case on a technicality. This is despite the fact that the lawsuit, as I mentioned, not only provided bank ledgers actually detailing the payments, the bribes paid to these corrupt PDVSA officials, it also included emails discussing the scheme. They were openly talking about on these emails how they could, cheat Russian companies out of winning the contracts and to favor these corporations such as Trafigura, such as Glencore, and Lukoil, other large international oil companies. And They even at one point used a bribed PDVSA official in order to set up a cloned server within the PDVSA offices. And this allowed the consulting firm Helsing Incorporated to actually just directly access PDVSA's internal information, classified trading information live from their laptops in Miami or wherever they were, because they'd infiltrated PDVSA to that level. And there was just ample evidence submitted to the court in order to back this lawsuit, which is why the lawsuit was dismissed without any prejudice, which meant that the judge was saying it could in the future be filed again. But the reason that this judge tossed out the lawsuit in March of 2019 was really just based on a technicality. And interestingly enough, in the judge's reasoning for throwing out the case, whose name appears once again in order to justify this ruling? José Ignacio Hernández. It turns out that in August of 2018, the oil companies involved in the case and accused in the case of paying these bribes and cheating PDVSA out of billions of dollars actually hired José Ignacio Hernández as a lawyer in order to once again testify on their behalf, testify on behalf of corporations cheating Venezuela out of billions of dollars, robbing Venezuela. They paid him in order to testify that the PDVSA litigation trust established in order to bring the lawsuit in the United States was invalid under Venezuelan law. So it was a completely technical argument. It didn't invalidate any of the evidence actually submitted to the court, but based on his testimony, the judge decided to dismiss the case. And I looked through the docket, the court docket in Florida, and found José Ignacio Hernández's testimony to the court, in which he admits he was paid $350 an hour by these oil companies in order to provide this testimony, which cleared them for the time being. And then within a few months of taking this action on behalf of oil companies suing Venezuela, he's suddenly the top legal representative of Venezuela in the United States, which would mean it was his responsibility to fight these oil companies in court. If he really had the interests of Venezuela at heart, and he was working as the Attorney General representing Venezuela in the United States, he was supposed to be fighting these companies and proving the bribery scheme and winning back these damages that they'd stolen from Venezuela for over a 15-year period. But it's impossible that he could do that because he was actually paid by these interests battling Venezuela in court. And it's a clear violation of the American Bar Association standards for lawyers, which clearly state you can't go and work for one client if you'd previously worked on behalf of the interests that would be damaging to that client. And he didn't disclose this information to the Venezuelan National Assembly, which approved his appointment to the position of Attorney General. And so that's why even members of Venezuela's opposition, such as Jorge Millán, were questioning him and starting to show frustration with his lack of transparency and what really I think can be fairly described as corruption. You have to be careful in using that term, I think, because it's thrown around a lot, but I don't know what else you call it when someone is paid by interests which they then go on to represent in spite of the fact that they're claiming to represent the interests of the Venezuelan people.